Hi, welcome to Composer's Voice. I am really happy to be here with Lawrence Kramer and Helen Lynn. How are you guys?
Oh, doing fine, thanks.
Thank you. I'm fine.
Great. Why don't you tell me a little bit, tell me your name and who you are and what you do and a little bit about this project. Helen, do you want to start?
Sure. I'm Helen Lin, a classical pianist, um, but I do a lot of contemporary music recently. This project is, from Larry. We try to promote minority composers. Um, or at first, we try to focus on female composers. It's not very easy. Actually asked among all my female composers who are minority. They don't seem to have this kind of combination like for soprano and piano. They do have a lot of chorus or symphonic music. So, and thanks to Larry, he did a lot of research. He found two female composer work, which I found it simply just amazing.
Oh, yes. Larry.
Yes, well, I am Larry or Lawrence Kramer, and I am a professor at Fordham University, which is the host of the Voices Up concert series that we'll be presenting this music on. I'm a professor of English. My day job is teaching English. I'm a musicologist and do scholarly work in musicology. I have a book coming out this month called Music and the Forms of Life, which I heartily recommend to all of your listeners, watchers. And I'm a composer. And the discussion of Helen's discussion of the program that's coming up on the 19th of October is kind of exactly what you need to know. I'm very pleased to be able to have gotten the women composers on the program. And we were trying to highlight the sheer diversity of really good, interesting, innovative music from quarters that we should have been paying more attention to all along, but are finally figuring out that we can learn a lot and take a lot of pleasure in doing so now and going forward.
So, yeah, I love this topic. So, I'm a contemporary composer. I've run a couple of programs myself, and I, I do find it very interesting. We've got the what's it the style of art song, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, well, I'll give you a great example. I had a soprano who asked me to write for them, and I was like, yeah, I don't do art song. It's a very antiquated sort of style that was like at a particular time and so forth. And now we have electronics and we're doing this and there are different ensembles and things and so forth. So I didn't, it's kind of interesting as well, let's just say it out. We're sort of enveloping diversity and trying to include people and so forth and everything. And we have like an old standard of repertoire that we worked with. And now we're trying to incorporate something new where, yeah, it didn't even occur to me that most women composers are probably not writing art song. So is that what you found, or is it the other thing is just that you haven't the the reach out to women composers is just a hard thing to do.
Well, what I found is that there's plenty of vocal music by female composers with chamber ensembles. And the trouble is that we didn't have a chamber ensemble. So we had to look for voice and piano. Now, even within that limitation, there's still music out there. Our issue was, finding stuff that we liked, that was feasible, that was appropriate. And with more time, I think we could, produce several such programs and find people doing it. And another side of this was kind of throwing a light on Black composers in particular. And there are a lot of art songs by Black composers. So that's not hard to find. But I guess what I'd say about the form of the art song is that old classic 125-year-old slogan by Ezra Pound, make it new. So lots of ways to compose art songs that are quite different from the ones that are in the standard repertoire. And they will all be represented on our program.
Excellent. And Helen, you were saying a little bit about you're playing a lot of contemporary music now. Is that just for this program or in general, or?
In general, I'm belong to this contemporary chamber group, North and South Consonants. I joined them since 1994. So we had premiered many pieces, and we made many recordings,
Yes.
which nobody buys. But it's interesting that that shifting from real classical music to contemporary. I mean, I still do a lot of older classical standard repertoire, but it was a new language to me. I found it very interesting and intriguing at first, and how to interpret the new music, and you're actually a bridge between the composers and the audience. But one good thing is you have reference. You can ask the living composer questions that you can't ask Beethoven or Bach. But I just found it very interesting, and I really liked it. So I started doing a lot more contemporary music.
That's awesome.
Yes, that's what we want to hear from so many more performers than we actually do hear it from. So bravo.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and North and South Consonants, I can say, is kind of a staple here in New York, I would say.
Yes.
They put on a lot of, are they still doing performances of Christ St. Stephen's?
Yes.
Yeah. They are an awesome group organization, and they present many composers. Thanks for that. And thank you. That was great.
Oh, thank you.
So since 1994, so you've been playing a lot of contemporary music for a while then.
Yes.
Yeah. You're talking about like a different language. So what does that mean?
Well, like finding the melodic lines, and there's also all different kinds of chords, dissonance chords, and you just have to find your way to interpret it. The melodic line is not necessarily like Bach and Beethoven, Chopin, so easy to pick up. But once if you do it for a while, you kind of know the language, so it's easier. I mean, the approach is still the same as to play a Bach piece. It's not just notes. There are things behind it.
And in this concert, like, what are some pieces that you would highlight, or what contemporary language is sort of being brought forward?
For this concert, I think they're kind of diverse. We have older 20th century Black composer art songs, and of course there's Larry's song cycles, and there's a Gabriella Lena Frank, who's in the 50s, I think. She lives in California. She has a short song cycle, which I find it very interesting. And also I'm playing a Margaret Bond's solo piano piece, Troubled Water. Her writing, it's standard classical, but very strongly influenced by jazz and blues. So it's a variety of all contemporary music.
And my assumption is the Black artists with the art song is also heavily steeped in blues and gospel, and
yes,
yeah, absolutely.
Well, it's a very rich tradition, and there are subtle ways of incorporating pieces so that there's a different sound to it, a kind of distinct sound to it. We wouldn't necessarily automatically recognize as jazz or blues, but it's there. And also a lot of jazz harmony, which doesn't necessarily have to be used in the way that an improvising jazz group would use it, but it's very useful. I do it too. I mean, one absorbs these things. There's a lot of crossover intersection in the musical world. Always has been, but I think recognizing that now is more important than it ever was.
I agree wholeheartedly, and I think that's it was interesting, Helen, when you're talking about language, and definitely Bach, Beethoven, Mozart have a language and a style and methods and so forth that's rooted in tradition, and not to say that is not in different ethnicities, but they're pulling from traditions much more recent, right? I guess that's a and sort of there's a different language and a different style to it.
Right. Also, to their ethnicity, the nationality, they bring in. I think nowadays the composer try to bring in their own folk tunes from their own country or background, and a lot of my friends are from Asia. They always use the Asian musical background with their instrumentation or like traditional Asian instruments. So it was, I just find it very interesting. Like the Gabriella Lena Frank, she used her background, which is like half Hispanic. She used that language. She used the Peruvian folk tunes. So the nowadays the contemporary music it's a very, very wide range. It's not just like people think it's melodies and weird chords. There's a lot of stuff going on.
I agree. I think for me, the exciting part about like contemporary music is that since there's a huge globalization, that there are lots and lots of diverse ethnicities of which we have a recorded history of. We have more access both to the music in general, but also to the composers that might be sitting, in another country or in, another region, or have a very different background. And I think we're all, definitely in the arts, we're naturally curious. So when we hear something new, we're excited, even if that something new isn't very new at all, right?
Right.
To pick up and kind of emphasize a point that Helen was making, I think that one of the things that's emerging is that we are now simply not afraid to make the aspects of our musical personalities that are rooted in cultural, ethnic traditions or national traditions present in the music forthrightly. And that applies to other kinds of modes of identity as well. You think of a mode of identity and we'll get it in the music somehow. And that's a real break, I think, with the standard approach to classical music, where music that manifested some kind of local quality was always deemed inferior to the music that apparently was aiming at universality, that did not mark its ethnicity in any way. Even though the music that did do that was often very popular, both in its own time and afterwards. So I think that when we free ourselves up and say, okay, like everything else we do in the world, music is an expression of who we are, and we should not kind of try to exclude every sign of that which makes us distinct as well, or instead of that which kind of brings us all together, we get a lot more opportunity to do many interesting things. And also to look back in the past and say, hey, there are some people back there, and they were doing some interesting things too. And they weren't all white men. So,
absolutely. Absolutely. And I feel like there is a growing sort of want for, diversity and hearing new things, which is great for me. I think it's hard to be a composer against some of the some monoliths of history that were in its shade, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And monoliths that used to dominate the new music scene.
Oh.
I'm of a generation that grew up in a very, very restricted, very, very politicized environment musically, and it actually delayed my compositional career by decades. So it was something I took very personally, and felt very much freed up when I finally said, hey, I don't care what you guys think. I'm going to do this. And I've sort of been lucky and had very good performers like Helen here and others, and been able to move forward.
Larry, and let me ask you a little bit about that.
Yep.
Because I am pretty sure I know what you're talking about,
Mm-hmm.
but I am almost positive nobody else does. So
you're really dating me now, right?
No, hey, look, I'm in the same boat, but it's so and for anybody who's listening and so forth. Oh, and I should say this: anybody has a question or whatever, please feel free to type it into the chat, and we'll be happy to answer it for you. But yeah, so the World War II happened, and it was definitely a break musically, and the styles and methodology and so forth. There became giant camps that sort of let's say took over the academic and sort of musical, what's the right word, institutions, and then it was just like a new way of writing music, a language that people adhere to and so forth, and that's how they did it. Which, I mean, I would there was lots of I was about to say ethnicity, maybe not so much ethnicity.
It was actually pretty scarce.
Yeah.
When I was in college and in graduate school, there were two great institutions, if you will, dominating musical life in the universities. And there was always a dissonance between what was going on in the universities, what was actually going on in the concert world. But in the universities, you could either be a part of avant-garde experimentation, dominated by figures like John Cage or Morton Feldman, and on the other hand, you could be those who were engaged in what we used to call total serialism, the adaptation of Schoenberg's 12-tone method and its projection into other musical dimensions like pitch. I began with pitch, like rhythm, timbre, tempo, and so forth. And leading figures there were people like Milton Babbitt and Pierre Boulez. And if you moved 1 inch out of the orthodoxy of either camp, you risked being basically shunned and held in contempt. It was like, and God forbid you should use a tonal chord anywhere. And it produced some very ugly episodes historically, in which esteemed composers who changed their mind about aesthetics found themselves the target of real rage by their colleagues. One example of a person whom I knew not well, but personally, because he was a teacher at the University of Pennsylvania, where I was a student, was George Rothberg, who became the object of opprobrium by people who felt they had betrayed him because he didn't want to write 12-tone music anymore. So it was a terrible time, and at that time I said, I really don't want to write music I don't want to listen to. So it stopped me for a long time.
Understandable. I think, yeah, like I said, it's kind of a thing that's the young composer right now doesn't even that sort of history doesn't even exist, right?
Right.
I mean,
Yeah, they're lucky them. I mean, and more power to them. I mean, it's great.
yeah, exactly. And yeah, anyway, but I feel like, that like, it's really all about the sort of diversity and so forth. Like there, I mean, it's a musical style. It's like one of these set boundaries that doesn't really need to be set, right? I mean, that's the sort of
Yeah, I mean,
thing.
I'm sure, Helen, you'll agree with me, but if you don't, please say. But I don't care if you want to write a 12-tone piece, go ahead and write it. Make sure it's expressive and something that I want to hear, and also don't tell me that I have to write it too.
Exactly.
Right. Or for that matter, you don't want to be expressive and you just want a mechanical sort of barrage of notes that's your thing and that's how you do it. Great.
Yeah, great
Yeah.
for you.
Y-
Myself, I'm not going to be in the audience much, but okay. Yeah, but yeah, sure. Everybody has carte blanche and should.
And you know what? So let me hit that topic too. So anyway, I just I've serviced a lot of composers. So like I remember, um, I wear a couple of different hats, and for me, anything goes. If you want, like, if that's what floats your boat, and that's how you want to write it, that's great. Um, then there's putting on a producer hat and like getting out to audiences, of which there's some music that's harder to digest than others. Period. There's this, and I will say that for Bach, Beethoven, Mozart too. There are some pieces that are difficult, I think, whether anyway for a host of different reasons. So let's talk about the programming a little bit. What what are the different factors that you guys take into account when you're making a program and reaching out to audiences? I mean, it's a little bit of a different environment. I know it's a public concert, but in general, you have a smaller group that you're servicing, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So what sort of things come into those, into play when you're designing the concert?
Okay. I'll pick this up, I guess. And then maybe Helen, you can tell us a little bit about how the North-South consonants does it. Um, when I am doing a vocal concert, I'm looking for two things. One reflects the fact that I do have this literary background, and I'm very concerned in any kind of vocal music with the relationship between the music and the text. So I want the relationship between those two to have some kind of vitality and accessibility to it. I want people to be able to hear the fact that they're actually listening to a multimedia work, and that the way in which the music is going forward and the way in which the text is being both sung and also composed for, but those have to coalesce to make a whole which makes expressive and conceptual sense. That's what I look for in songs. Uh, so that's a kind of aesthetic preoccupation. And a lot of composers are not that careful about the way in which they set words. It's just true. And they may have aesthetic reasons for that. And as you were saying before, Rob, blessings on your head. Do what makes sense to you. But I like pieces that really examine expressively and explore expressively an approach to the text. The other thing I look for in putting a program together is musical diversity of whatever kind. The program has to have a sufficient contrast to make it an exciting event rather than too much uniformity. So I always look for pieces that complement each other rather than resemble each other. And then there's the element that you mentioned, that some pieces are just difficult to put across, and for good reasons or bad, whatever. But I have a small audience and I want to keep it. It's a sophisticated audience, but it has discernible preferences, and I have to kind of be sensitive to that. So, with luck, I find experimental pieces that are also immediately attractive. And I think the Frank piece on our program on the 19th is an example of that. So, just some thoughts in response to your question.
How about you, Helen?
Of course, you want a concert to suit yourself and the audience. So when, like Larry asked about the North and South, it's a little different because they are a chamber group mostly serve North and South American composers, young composers. So we have annual like an open calls for composers to submit their works. Then the director will pick. So mostly we are premiering their works. So it's a little different. Sometimes they're good, sometimes they're not so good. But then you have to do your best to interpret it. So it's a little different than just it by yourself picking pieces. Especially as for us, we don't have a choice to pick. But still, they are. We try to make a wide range, instrumental wise, like just a quartet. Like our ensemble has a quartet, a string quartet, a wood quintet. Sometimes it's larger, sometimes small, just a trio. And the larger will conclude piano and percussion sometimes. So it's our audience, usually the same audience. There's the same crowd. So I think actually our job now is try to include more younger generations. We're losing people like from the 20s to the 30s. They don't go to concert anymore. I mean, even they don't go to concert, they won't come to our concerts. We're kind of missing that. Every time when I look out to the audience, I see people in the 40s and 50s and my friends that I forced them to come. So it's how do we bring back the younger generation? That is I think it's our job right now.
Yeah, I wholly agree. And of course, one way partly to do that is to get composers in that age group to do some work for us.
Right.
And I'll just add briefly that one of the nice things about the Voices Up series is that I don't make all these decisions myself. I always work collaboratively with the performers. So Helen and Shanelle Woods, our soprano, and I, we went back and forth over quite a number of pieces for 3-4 weeks, right, putting this together. The collaboration is very satisfying, and it helps make for a really solid program. And of course, the musicians should have a voice in saying what they play. So that's I think a key issue.
Yeah, I think it's let's just put it this way. There's a lot of different methods and methodologies. I mean, even like North and South, call for scores and playing, new works from North and South, American composers. That is a strategy and a technique, and it definitely goes for a particular audience. And I look, part of the reason why I know them very well is I'm one of their audience. I always have been aware of what who's on their programs and when it's going forward and things like that. That's part of their thing. period. That's you know what you're getting yourself into when you go into one of those concerts. It's
Right.
just and of which, like, that's whether the style is you like or not and so forth. I definitely would say there's a certain level there, but you understand that you may not like every piece that's going to happen.
Right.
But that's for me, when I go, that's part of the discovery, right?
It's like going to a museum to see contemporary art. Not every piece is you will like, but you try to appreciate that.
I love that idea.
Yeah, it's great.
And well, look, I mean, and getting more people involved, and expanding the base, that's sort of kind of the whole thing. Oh, and anyway, it always has been, right?
Yep.
Right.
Sure. One of the things that we do at Voices Up, although we're not doing it this year, is try to invite people to compose music to newly written poems, so that the music is not only contemporary in its own right, but addressing texts that are vitally engaged with issues of contemporary life. And most of those contemporary texts are drawn from the prize-winning volumes of the Poets Out Loud series that Fordham University Press publishes. I mean, this is a Fordham University operation, but this is a well-known national series competition, and we've had settings of these really remarkably up-to-date poems, mostly by younger poets. And we'll presumably be resuming that in either the next concert or the one after that. This particular concert, the diversity theme was paramount. And the only new element was what I like to think of as a rediscovery, because I made it, of the poet whom I set in the song cycle that I contributed to the program, which is called Scenes from the Ghetto. And the Ghetto is in quotation marks because it refers to a poem published in 1918 about life on New York's Lower East Side, the Jewish ghetto. And it was written by a woman named Lola Ridge, who was famous during her lifetime and promptly forgotten afterwards, but whose poetry is really good and deserves a revival. So this is part of an effort to revive her presence on the scene. And we'll continue in January when the press actually publishes an edition of The Ghetto and Other Poems, so that it will be widely available. We'll actually have proofs of that book available for people to look at the concert.
Great. Well, I'm gonna ask for some plugs or anything else that you guys want to talk about. But before I forget, let me plug myself and also offer Larry. You're looking the setting pieces to newly written poems sounds like an awesome idea. Sounds like a 15 minutes of fame idea. If you're ever looking to collaborate, always open. Okay. But yeah, so do you guys want to Helen, do you have anything to plug for or talk about that's coming up for you?
Not much. Not much. Right now I'm just focusing on this concert. It's quite challenging for me, and some of the music we got it kind of late, so I have to really practice. So right now I'm focusing on this, and later on I have some other project, but should I talk about it?
Yeah,
sure.
Oh, okay. My husband and I we actually made a recording of all minimalist duo recording. So we're in the middle of mixing. So hopefully will come out sometime next year.
Sounds wonderful.
It's the three minimalist, the iconic Philip Glass, Steve Reich, and John Adams.
Awesome.
That's a major project right now.
No, absolutely, for sure. That sounds terrific.
Great. Well, keep us in the loop and come back. I can't wait.
Okay.
Yeah. Larry, Helen, it's been wonderful to have you. Thank you so much for coming here and talking about Voices Up. And I encourage everybody to come down and and see it live. Right?
Yes.
Live is better than video.
Yes.
Absolutely. October 19th, 7:30 p.m., Fordham University Lincoln Center campus, 60th Street and Columbus Avenue.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you again. And
Thanks for having us, Rob.
Yeah. Thank you, Rob.
see you soon.